You thought it already happened, but no, the bipocalypse is here. Not only are 6 teams on bye this coming week, but the fantasy playoffs are right around the corner. Let's figure out who to pick up on waivers before that happens. We have a few interesting new names worth picking up, as well as some streamers you might need at quarterback or tight end. It goes without saying that the first injury we need to talk about, Christian McCaffrey. It's starting to feel like CMC at the 1.1 was doomed from the start. I mean, missing half the season and then coming back not looking like the same guy. If you watched that game, the snow game in Buffalo, it wasn't a hard hit. It wasn't even anything that looked too bad. He just kind of went down softly. But again, this is a guy that we know just missed half the season, and the Achilles is in play here. Right now, again, this just happened as I'm doing this, so I have no idea the severity. I know that it doesn't look good to see a guy go down on a non-contact injury, and especially when we're talking about a running back who has had this injury history already this season. So we're going to prepare for the worst, and that will lead into our very first waiver wire pickup. It goes without saying if you haven't, for some reason, got his handcuff. The first big injury from week 13 was the one that probably made all the highlights. Trevor Lawrence with that inarguably dirty hit on him, and so he was carted off. It seems like an obvious concussion situation. Doug Peterson did say after the game he's going to be fine, which is good, but that doesn't mean he's going to play next week. We still don't know, so let's hold our breath and see what happens. Although we'll say Mac Jones didn't look too terrible this game in the second half. Now, the player we really hope is okay after coming off his career best game, Ladd McConkey, late in the Chargers game, left with a knee injury. Don't have any new word on what exactly is going on and the severity of it. Let's just really hope that he's fine for week 14. And for Baltimore, Rashad Bateman also left with a knee injury pretty early there. And interestingly enough, this meant absolutely nothing for Deontay Johnson. No, Tylan Wallace was the next man up for receiver. It really looks like Deontay Johnson is just going to do nothing. This was just a completely pointless trade for them to make. I think we can say the same for the Steelers. Calvin Austin also scored a touchdown in this game, but left after taking a hard hit a little bit later on from Cam Taylor-Britt. And Mike Williams didn't get on the field, didn't catch a pass. Again, why is he there? Noah Brown of the Commanders left with a ribs injury. This doesn't mean a whole lot in the first place, but Washington is one of those teams on bye next week anyways, so if you had him, he's easily droppable. At tight end, Dallas Goedert thought he might have taken advantage of Devontae Smith's absence, and he did catch a touchdown, but then he also left with another injury. This time it's a knee. And back on Thursday, the rookie Theo Johnson of the Giants, after coming along, well, he also suffered a pretty serious injury late. His season actually might be over, depending on the severity here. Is it possible that we see new addition Greg Dulcich in the offense? And then finally, this one stings the most. Our sweet prince, Taysom Hill, taken from us too soon. I mean, this could definitely be a season-ending injury, although, again, as of right now, can't tell you that for sure. Didn't look good, and so at least the dilemma of whether to go full Taysom or not might be solved. Now let's get to who you should be picking up on the waiver wire, putting your claims for ahead of week 14. A lot of you are ready for the playoffs, maybe even starting the playoffs this week. Hopefully not, because again, there's going to be a lot of teams that are out, but you have to make some smart moves. You also want to get ahead of things when you make your picks on Underdog. And if you haven't tried it yet, you can still sign up right now. Make sure that you use promo code ENDGAME, because if you do, you get a free pick. And right now it's Jameis Winston just getting 1 yard on Monday Night Football against the Broncos. You sign up, you get this free pick, and you still get up to $1,000 worth of bonus cash for your initial deposit. So use code ENDGAME to sign up now. Before I dig into the players, let me just say I'm going to do it a little differently, because your priorities are going to really depend on your roster and your makeup. At this point in the season, it's really about filling needs, and there isn't a certain player that I think really jumps to the front of, let's say, your waiver priority this week. This is really going to depend on maybe who you need for your bye. Maybe you are thin at running back, although it's actually more likely you're thin at wide receiver this season. Or what are you looking for in terms of playoff schedule? So let's start with the running back position. If you're a playoff team or a prospective playoff team still, and you had CMC, well, even if you didn't, look, you know the value of having a running back stash, a handcuff, whatever you want to call it, a guy who's an insurance policy for a very high-end running back. And CMC is the obvious case here, which means Jordan Mason was the top stash you could make. He was number one on my list. That video I did just 2 weeks ago. And this is why. This is not hyperbole. This is a very real possibility. Maybe CMC is out the rest of the season, at the very least this coming week. This is why you stash a guy like Jordan Mason, whether you have McCaffrey or not. And so if Jordan Mason is out there, which he is in about 60% of Yahoo leagues, again, it depends on your league type, he may have been dropped. You need to go check, regardless of whether you need him, whether you have McCaffrey, because we saw what he did early in the season when he was the main runner. And despite the way this 49ers offense has looked recently, there's still a ton of value as the running back one in the 49ers offense. So a guy that we thought might be valuable late in the year, and maybe it'll still happen, I'm not sure, but I'm going to say Jonathon Brooks might be worth scooping back up after he looked very droppable, a week or two ago. And this is just a really odd situation. Why a team like Carolina would be the first to draft a running back in the NFL draft and then give your existing veteran running back, Chuba Hubbard, a big extension during the season when you really didn't even need to. And then immediately after that, 2 weeks later, you're going to start fading him out and giving the rookie more touches. That's what's going on right now, and it might be something that continues to trend that way. Now, let's not exaggerate things. It's not like Brooks got as many touches as Hubbard in this game or anything like that. But after last week, just seeing 5 snaps altogether, this week it got up to 15 for Jonathon Brooks, but even in that very limited time on the field, he got 3 targets in the passing game. Chuba got none. Just those 15 snaps. Jonathon Brooks had 6 carries as opposed to Chuba only getting 12. Now, this may be an aberration more so than a trend, but you can't rule out Brooks, again, coming off of a season-long injury where he's just now starting to get his feet under him, getting used to the NFL game. You can't rule out that he does get a little bit more involved each and every week going forward. And so I can't say Brooks has standalone value. This is still purely a stash kind of situation. But this is also a very high-end handcuff. Again, he was the first running back drafted for a reason. He looked pretty good on a couple of his receptions that he made, making guys miss. We know he's got the goods. And we've now seen that this Carolina offense is actually somewhat legitimate now under Bryce Young even. And they definitely have had success running the ball. And so, if nothing else, he becomes one of the more high-end handcuffs if you do have a guy like Chuba Hubbard. Now, besides the fact can't guarantee that he really gets many touches or even as many as he did this week, well, next week it's the Philadelphia Eagles on the road. So you probably want no part of Jonathon Brooks in a lineup. But looking ahead, man, that playoff schedule is pretty nice. This is why I actually put Chuba Hubbard as one of my top 12 playoff running backs. I thought he was still going to be the bell cow here, and this schedule is so nice. It gets the Dallas run defense, gets Arizona, and then that Tampa Bay run defense again. So while Hubbard should be the guy who continues to lead fantasy teams to success, you can't count on Brooks also being a factor. And then there's a running back who is freely available in almost 100% of all fantasy leagues heading into week 14. Sincere McCormick of the Raiders, and hey, he looks like the number 1 running back on that team for what that's worth. Alexander Mattison, Zamir White missed again. Doesn't seem like Madison's on the verge of coming back, and even if Zamir White comes back, does it really matter? Look, Amir Abdullah was also in the mix. This was almost a near 50-50 split on the ground, and Abdullah is the pass-catching back, which is why he would seem to have the most relevance in terms of fantasy usage. But I'll tell you, McCormick definitely looked better as a runner. In fact, 64 yards on the ground on 12 carries. That means in his 2 games when he's actually been used on the active roster, averaging a cool 5.7 yards per carry. What's really impressive about this is the fact that this came on that Black Friday game against the Chiefs. The Chiefs are statistically still the number 1 run defense in the NFL, average only 3.3 yards per carry. So the fact that he was able to average over 5 yards per carry is pretty impressive. Now, I will say they probably didn't take into account too much the running game of the Raiders because the Raiders have the worst running game in the league. And so sure, maybe there were some generous holes that he could run through, whatever. I get that. But Sincere McCormick has flashed, and I'll tell you, this guy has some talent. I know this because I've seen him play at UTSA. This is a guy who was a former 2-time Conference USA Offensive Player of the Year. Put up prolific numbers in college. Again, a little bit of a smaller conference, but still, this guy has shown the ability to break tackles, break away because he's got that speed. You think he's a rookie. Technically he is, but only because he's been on the practice squad the last couple of years. Hasn't gotten his chance, and now he's making the most of it. I'll tell you what, if he could do something like that against Kansas City next week, it gets that soft Tampa Bay defense. And so I really hope he gets enough opportunities to continue to produce. I think he will. Abdullah will still be in the mix, sure, but McCormick has earned himself an audition as the lead runner. If you're looking for help at wide receiver this week, how can you not just say, let's plug Nick Westbrook-Ikhine in there, at least he'll get me a touchdown. Those of us old enough to remember Boomer, Chris Berman, and his catchphrase for Chris Carter, now the Hall of Famer, all he does is catch touchdowns. It was an inside joke. But anyways, Nick Westbrook-Ikhine literally only catches touchdowns. After 13 weeks of football, as it stands, here are your touchdown leaders for wide receiver. Jamar Chase, Amon-Ra St. Brown, Terry McLaurin, Nick Westbrook-Ikhine. He's got 8 touchdowns on 20 receptions. That is not only is completely unsustainable, it's borderline insane, and yet it continues to happen. What's even crazier about this is that the first 4 games of the season, back when they still had DeAndre Hopkins, Westbrook-Ikhine didn't even have a single catch. He was not involved in it after the bye and then after the D-Hop trade. He has scored in every game except for one, but that's a total of 8 touchdowns in 8 games. And then next week, guess what? He gets the Jacksonville Jaguars defense. Is he going to score again? Probably. 2 weeks ago when I told you to pick up Westbrook-Ikhine, I was kind of half kidding. I didn't think this would continue. It's continuing. Just roll with it. Pick him up and stream him. Now, a few weeks ago when Christian Kirk was ruled out for the season, I did talk about Parker Washington on the Beat the Breakout video. And not much has happened because Trevor Lawrence hasn't been playing. So Trevor Lawrence comes in and he plays this week and then he's gone as well. But a funny thing happened. Parker Washington still broke out. In fact, Parker Washington was the leading target getter in terms of target share for the Jags both before and after T-Law's injury. All of Washington's real production came later in the game, the second half, because let's face it, the Jags were in comeback mode. They were throwing and the Texans really let them get back into the game. But man, Washington showed something, caught that touchdown, wound up with 100 yards. In fact, 6 catches, 103 yards, and a touchdown. So he was more productive than even Brian Thomas Jr. And don't forget, veteran Gabe Davis has also been out with an injury for this team. Parker Washington definitely has opportunity here. Just hasn't really clicked for him, and I know part of it is the consistency of this entire Jags offense. Of course, Trevor Lawrence not being on the field enough lately to really develop that chemistry, but I like Washington's game. Again, the opportunities here. This is a team that's going to have to continue to pass the ball a ton, let's face it, and that probably will continue throughout the rest of the season. The only reason I'm not going to advocate for Washington more strongly, maybe not going to be my favorite streamer this week, even though this is probably the week that you might need a guy like him, is the schedule against Tennessee. I know Tennessee looked miserable this week against Washington, but they're still fairly tough against wide receivers. In fact, they've only given up a 100-yard game once all year to a wide receiver, and somehow it was to Keon Coleman. But on the other hand, L'Jarius Sneed and Chidobe Awuzie, 2 of their top corners, are out with injury, and so this is at least a decent enough matchup. Again, this is the bipocalypse we're talking about. You need a receiver. I think Parker Washington got that target share that you want to see for a guy that you might need to throw in your lineup. And then a veteran that came with a surprisingly high target share in his return from injury was Brandin Cooks, the Dallas Cowboys. In fact, on Thanksgiving, Cooks' 7 targets led the Cowboys, more so than CeeDee Lamb. Obviously, part of that was Lamb leaving a little bit early in that game, and the Cowboys didn't really need to throw it a whole lot against this Giants team. They're going to need to throw it a whole lot probably this coming week because they get the Cincinnati Bengals. Now, obviously, Cooks is not as enticing as he would have been with Dak Prescott at quarterback, but I will say at the very least, Cooper Rush has handled himself well enough. He's not turning the ball over. He's been a capable backup fill-in. And so while Cooks didn't do a whole lot this past week to make you even take notice or even realize that he was back at all, he did catch that touchdown, but a lot of people weren't really watching by that point. He is somebody who's going to get targets, and again, this matchup I think could play into his favor, especially what if CeeDee Lamb does happen to miss, or maybe he's limited during this game, because that shoulder could be a concern. We've seen what happened with the Bengals this whole past month plus, and even including the bye, these past 6 weeks, they've given up an average of 35 points a game. They're just getting into shootouts. Even with the Pittsburgh Steelers, somehow it managed to turn into a shootout. This Bengals offense continues to roll, and their defense continues to roll over. So through sheer volume, I feel like Cooks is an interesting play. And again, if Lamb is out, he gets a whole lot more interesting. With Lamar, JD, Knicks, and others on bye in Week 14, yeah, a lot of you are going to stream out of necessity. So if you're looking for a quarterback, I think you got to just go with Caleb Williams. Like, forget the schedule. There was a little bit of hesitation on my part and on a lot of people because, man, they got the Detroit Lions on Thanksgiving. That defense is for real. You didn't know how he would respond. We needed to see another week. Okay, just forget all that. Caleb Williams is showing why he was the number one pick in the draft. He's showing exactly what he's capable of now that he's got a new offensive coordinator who is suddenly the head coach. And hey, with Eberflus gone, doesn't it just make you feel better about the Bears in general? Even against a tough Lions defense, he threw for 3 touchdowns, 256 yards. The previous week, threw for 2 touchdowns, 340 yards, and ran for a touchdown. And again, the legs being part of the equation here, hey, Caleb Williams is bringing it all. So the schedule isn't, maybe the best out of any quarterback. It doesn't matter. This guy has weapons. We knew that this was going to be one of the things that would benefit him from a fantasy standpoint, having DJ Moore, having Keenan Allen, having Rome Odunze. Now it's finally happening. And for what it's worth, this Niners defense that he gets to face off against in Week 14, we know that this is not nearly the same defense, and Nick Bosa might miss again. Fred Warner, not 100%. Yeah, this Niners team is reeling. And if you just need a quarterback or you're just tired of streaming, don't want to deal with it throughout the fantasy playoffs, it's really not a bad idea just set and forget Caleb Williams because next week he gets to Minnesota. Again, good real-life defense, but they do give up points to quarterbacks. And then he gets Detroit again. Well, we've already seen that's not a problem. Look, I'm just going to put my trust in a guy who's got the most talent out of most of the players that are available on the waiver wire. I'm actually going to throw a second quarterback your way if you're looking, because I realize some of you don't get the opportunity to pick up a guy like Caleb Williams. You need to dig deeper. Maybe you're in a Superflex 2 quarterback league or one of those odd leagues where everybody hoards backup quarterbacks for absolutely no reason. Okay, well, you know what? You got a good option here in Aiden O'Connell. I know it's weird to talk about 2 Raiders at once right before the playoffs, but hey, here we are. Look, this offense is different because they got some different personnel here. O'Connell injected some life into the passing game. McCormick has injected life into the running game. And so we're going to have to take a hard look at Aiden O'Connell because, man, he was dealing against this really tough Chiefs defense. 340 yards and 2 touchdowns. This was almost completely overlooked by the fact that the Raiders almost pulled out a victory against the Chiefs before their, last second typical voodoo magic. O'Connell looked crisp. I mean, he was throwing the ball down the field, something we didn't get from Gardner Minshew. O'Connell actually has an arm. He can get the ball downfield. He takes chances. Won't always pay off, but man, at least he's aggressive and he will try to get the ball to his playmakers. And he's going from this Chiefs defense this week, as it just so happens, you already know this, to that Bucks defense, and this is still a team you want to stream against. I mean, they haven't given up as much in the last couple of weeks. They almost let Bryce Young throw for 300 yards this past week, and they're still the worst statistically against quarterbacks in terms of fantasy points allowed. I really don't see that turning around all of a sudden. So O'Connell isn't going to be a guy I'm rushing to stream in a single QB league necessarily because I think he should have a better option, but he's also not the worst. And again, in Superflex, he looks like a pretty strong start. And at tight end, I'm also going to give you a pair of options. One that's about half owned and maybe even less after this week. Will Dissly. Yes, the same Will Dissly who just caught 0 passes for 0 yards. That Will Dissly. He had already been dropped over 10,000 times in Yahoo this past week, and he's going to get dropped in a whole lot more leagues after doing nothing this week. But here's why I'm interested. So first of all, I did mention the Ladd McConkey injury. I'm not assuming Ladd is going to be out next week, but it is possible that he's either out or limited. So that's obviously a huge factor. But even if Ladd plays, I think this is a smash spot for Dissly. And out of all the other options that you realistically will have to stream at tight end, he's the best. He has been phased out the last couple of weeks, but realistically, if you look at the box score, so has every single receiver not named Ladd McConkey. Josh Palmer, Quentin Johnson, every other receiver they've got has done almost nothing. You're talking like 2 catches. Quentin Johnson, in fact, got 5 targets, only 2 catches. And we know what happened the week before. He didn't catch anything that was thrown his way, basically. And so there is no other receiver that is making a mark here. Remember, J.K. Dobbins is also out. This team is passing the ball more. Dissly is not only due for a bounce back, but he is in the best spot to do so because of the matchup. The Chargers get the Chiefs, which means, hey, they're probably going to have to pass the ball a lot. And we did see, just as I mentioned with the Raiders here, we saw Brock Bowers, of course, generational talent at tight end, eviscerate that Chiefs defense. But this has happened all year. The Chiefs, for whatever reason, allow by far the most yards and the third most yards per target to tight end. That's the weak spot in the defense. They'll give up that middle of the field, not let you get deep on them. They're pretty tough against the run. But if there's a player that can benefit here, well, it would be Ladd McConkey, but also I think Will Dissly. And if you need to dig deeper, I will tell you this. I'm going to go with another Cowboy, Luke Schoonmaker at tight end. Also in a great spot, as I mentioned, that matchup with the Bengals. I just feel like Dallas is going to really need to throw the ball a ton just to stay alive in this game. And Schoonmaker is going to be the number one tight end, one of the top targets again, if Jake Ferguson misses. That's the big if. Don't know exactly what Ferguson's status is going to be. Now, Ferguson does play. Yeah, he's the one you want to start. He's also available in quite a few leagues because he's been dropped after not playing the last couple of weeks. But it seems like he's still not very far along in terms of concussion protocol. I really wouldn't be surprised, even with this extended absence, if he's out again. So I'm going to tentatively say I'll pick up Schoonmaker and make him my option if a guy like Dissly's not available, or if I just don't like what else is on the waiver wire. And also the fact that not only is Cincinnati giving up a lot of points here, but specifically against the tight end, they're just one of the worst defenses. If Ferguson is available and he's active, I'm going to play him. But if he isn't, Schoonmaker is a strong start at tight end. And of course, when you make these pickups, goes without saying, you need to cut somebody. Sometimes it's easy, but sometimes you're not sure whether to chop a player. I'll tell you, these are some players I would cut if I had them. We got a lot of questions about J.K. Dobbins. Is he worth holding on to? And generally, if a player's on IR and you have an IR slot empty, it doesn't hurt to just put him on there and then just stash him just in case. But I'll tell you, if you don't have an IR spot in your league and you don't have the roster space, I'm okay cutting him loose because, again, he's missing at least 4 games. The absolute best case scenario is he comes back week 17, and for a lot of you, that's your championship week, or maybe the week before. If for some reason you're still playing until week 18, all right, maybe that gives you a little bit more incentive to hold on to him. But man, even if he comes back, is he going to be 100%? Is he going to be the guy who's getting the bulk of the carries once again? Are they easing him back into action? There's so many variables here, but honestly, if you don't need to hold him and you're good enough at running back, I'm okay cutting him. And then in Baltimore, I told you Rashad Bateman left with a knee injury. I don't know how long he'll be out, but I'll tell you that even if he's fine and comes back, for the next game, I say game, not week, because the Ravens are on bye in week 14. You can cut Rashad Bateman. He's not playing next week and the rest of the season. It's not a great schedule. Really, what has Bateman done lately? Not a whole lot. I mean, he's kind of clung to fantasy relevance because of 5 touchdowns on the season. But over the past 5 games before week 13, he's averaging 36 yards per game. I mean, it's really just not enough of a ceiling. It's kind of a touchdown or bust situation. There's plenty of other guys, Nick Westbrook-Ikhine, who could also get you a touchdown and are healthy and are more involved. Look, all told, Bateman is not a guy you should be putting in your starting lineup if you're trying to win a fantasy championship. So this is the time to let him go. And this might surprise a lot of you. I think it's time to just cut Tank Dell. Texans also are off this coming week, but even when they come back, we have to take a really hard look at Tank Dell. I just told you Bateman had no upside. What is Tank Dell giving you? 1 catch for 23 yards against the Jaguars? He only drew 4 targets in this game against one of the worst pass defenses in the league. And CJ Stroud still didn't come up with an impressive performance against this Jags defense. I mean, at this point, we'll just forget what he did last year. Forget the upside. This Texans offense is not the same. Nico Collins absolutely is worth starting every single week. And that's kind of it here. And then finally, let me just say, save yourself the agony. If you have any Broncos running back, just forget it. Nobody's going to have value here. Try to go with somebody who at least you can guarantee will get some touches and not frustrate you on a weekly basis. The Broncos don't even play this week. And after that, I don't even care after that. I don't want a Broncos running back, period. I do want you to check out this week's playlist with all the videos that are going to help you win in week 14 and help you clinch that playoff spot or your bye.